Welcome to the Wordy Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Wordy Pair Podcast. I'm Rudy.
And I'm Justin.
And we're going to be talking about a Threefer today. This is Trio for Blunt Instruments. It is a collection of 3 novella-length mysteries by Rex Stout, 3 Nero Wolfe mysteries. And, previously we did Fer-de-Lance, which was his first novel-length Nero Wolfe story, and this isn't his first set of 3 novellas, but we did want to kind of look at 3 novellas and talk about how the novella-length mystery story is different from the novel-length mystery story. So, without further ado, I guess we should just kind of get started.
Yeah, are you going to call this episode Threefer Madness?
Maybe. That sounds like a great idea.
I mean, it's an idea.
It sounds like a decent idea. It sounds like a better idea than it sounds like something better than anything
Were
I'll
you
come
originally
up with.
were you originally going to title it just the first paragraph from the first story again? I told you not to do that.
Look, they want 200 characters. I fill it out with a random bucket of text from the book, and that's just how I can't see any other possible way to do that.
Spotify algorithm is just getting weird, man.
Well, the Spotify algorithm is telling me something completely different from the YouTube algorithm, so.
If we combine their powers, we might end up with, I don't know, the MySpace algorithm?
Maybe.
Did you say Captain Adblock?
Yes.
All right, I guess.
So the first story is titled Kill Now, Pay Later. And, I guess let's, start talking about it. What was your overall impression of this story?
Boy, I'm glad you asked. I'm really, really glad you asked that, because I was so relying on you asking yourself a question and answering it first, because I just listened to about 40 episodes of The Shadow, and now I can't remember what stories and what order the Nero Wolfe ones went in.
Wonderful. Okay, well then, I guess we'll kind of, judo chop to the side of that, and I will say, Kill Now, Pay Later, I thought, is an interesting story because the answer... No, it's not this one. I think this is an interesting story because it has a very abrupt solution. You can kind of get the solution just based on what people are thinking about in the first few pages, which is kind of a recurring theme of these shorter stories, is that often it's something that a character says early on that gives Wolfe the initial tip that he needs to completely solve the case. All he needs to do is find evidence after that. So this one is the story of a unfortunate Greek bootblack who partially works for Wolfe and Archie. Cleans and shines their shoes a couple of times a week. And Wolfe, the bootblack's name is Pete Vassos, and he gets $1 from Wolfe every time he shines his shoes 3 times a week. And Wolfe decided, kind of on his own, that that a Greek person should know about the greatness of Greek history. And so Wolfe begins basically teaching and afterwards quizzing Pete about Greek history, and that's kind of their history of interaction. Archie's a little bit kinder about it and lets him talk about whatever he wants, but that's the start of the story.
Yeah, and in typical Wolfe fashion, he kind of sits on... Well, he doesn't really sit on his discovery very much in this story, but he often does. Now in this one, he gets word of something that Pete says at the beginning, and that ends up being what leads him to his conclusion about the solution of this mystery, and fairly early on, too. But I think he does mention it to Inspector Kramer at some point early on in the story.
Yes, he always tells people... he always... So one of the interesting factors of the Wolfe-Archie Goodwin dynamic is that Archie Goodwin has a very well-developed photographic memory, or I guess tape recorder memory is more appropriate. But he does include gestures and stuff, he says, so it is kind of a photographic memory. And Wolfe often has Archie report verbatim, basically saying everything that the person said in a long, possible multiple-party conversation, including facial expressions, things like that. Kind of as if Archie is narrating a novel to Wolfe. And Wolfe always provides these verbatim reports to the police, usually Inspector Kramer, when they ask for them, because he's legally obligated to, but he doesn't provide any of his conclusions based on this verbatim thing. So basically, the police get the same information that the reader does, and the police don't solve it, but Wolfe does. But hypothetically, if the reader picked up on the same hint, they could make the same conclusions and then follow along the same thing with Wolfe. In this case, it's not quite a very strong case of that, because Wolfe hears something from Vassos, but he has to eliminate alternatives before he can reach his conclusion. And so a lot of this particular story is based on evaluating and meeting with the characters who are also involved in the murder. Basically, on the start of the story in question, Vassos comes early that day, and Archie and Wolfe ask him why, and he says, one of the guys that I often shine his shoes, he must have jumped out the window or something because he was dead, and I decided to leave and come here instead. And they're like, you should probably go and talk to the police. And he's like, no, it's fine, don't worry about it. And then he shines their shoes and leaves. And they quiz him a little bit, and that's where the hint comes. But the hint doesn't point to anybody until they've eliminated everybody else. The hint is basically a conclusion that Vassos makes, it's implied by something Vassos says, but you need to know more about the other characters in order to know who it points at, basically. It's a pretty clever clue.
Yeah, especially for a Nero Wolfe style story where you're not really expected to be able to solve it.
Right.
There's really a lot of going around and this happens in a lot of Nero Wolfe stories, but Archie basically gets to run to this office and kind of see how the layout is.
That happens quite a bit later in the story.
Yeah, but there, Archie is doing his thing. He makes a map for Wolfe at one point. He talks to all the suspects as you do in this kind of story.
Yeah.
And it's kind of neat how it works out, because a lot of times in mystery stories, you'll have the detective character will work out a solution just based on maybe conversations and one or two clues that pop up with the characters. Whereas one of the things that is nice about the Nero Wolfe stories is oftentimes the answer doesn't become apparent until Archie has done a bit of legwork that sometimes he just happens into something that's like, oh, wait, this is an obvious clue that no one should have overlooked, that the police should have probably picked up on. And then he brings it back to Nero Wolfe, who is then able to solve the case. And
right.
The part where they draw the map and everything, that kind of is that point in this story.
Well, the map doesn't really do it, but the character descriptions does. Basically, What happens is that Pete Vassos goes off, and then the next day, Pete's daughter shows up, Elma Vassos, and she has some bad news that her father. Let's see. Is it? Yeah, I think it's that they found her father dead. Yeah, they found her father dead. She brings that news to Wolfe and Archie, and engages. This is one of the fun things about Wolfe stories, is that Wolfe charges high fees, and he often won't lift a finger until someone with a lot of money shows up, but he often does get started working because either someone insults someone that he cares about, or shows that they respect him greatly. And what Elma Vassos brings is the $500, approximately, that Wolfe paid Pete. Basically, Pete never spent any of the money that Wolfe paid him, and Elma quotes her father as calling Wolfe the greatest man in the world. So this kind of is what gets Wolfe interested in the case a little bit. And now it becomes... Go ahead.
Are we syncing up again?
Yes.
Are we starting the episode? Are we starting the recording again? Let's just do another sync up. No,
I don't think we need to. We can just use that.
The ego of Nero Wolfe is notorious in these stories, but it's not just the ego sometimes. Like in this particular story, it's partially the ego, partially, hearing that, he's the greatest man in the world from someone who he, regularly communicated with and had correspondence with. And it's also partly that, that there was the whole thing about him saving all that money to eventually, do whatever with, but he still had all that money. Just something in Nero Wolfe, as he himself remarks in some of the stories, is there's a bit of a romantic streak. Sometimes to his dismay, he will remark that he has a bit of a romantic streak. But sometimes it's just a case of it looks like his ego, and usually it's Inspector Kramer that's calling him out on this, saying that this is just your ego, Wolfe. And it turns out that it wasn't really so much Nero Wolfe's ego as it was him seeing another route to a payday that nobody else has seen yet.
Yes.
But yeah, in this book, it's largely to do with the fact that he respects his bootblack.
And he respects the respect that his bootblack has for him.
Yeah.
It's, So basically, after that, Archie kind of goes on his exploratory, examinations of the various figures in the story. In Chapter 3, we have a straight-up list, a bulleted list of the characters and Elmo Vassos' impressions of them. There's some fun stuff with them having Elmo Vassos stay there. There's another fun element of this one because basically someone says to the police that Elmo Vassos, that the police get the impression that the reason Pete Vassos killed Ashby by pushing him out the window is because Ashby seduced Elma and then bragged about it to Pete. Pete, enraged by this, defilement of his daughter's honor, pushes him out the window. However, one of the cool aspects is that, and Wolfe often does this, he pulls some kind of a legal trick. He calls in Nathaniel Parker and says, I need you to set up a legal document to do this, or, a lawsuit to do this. And in this case, it's kind of clever. They basically say that they're going to sue all of the main characters in this drama for $1 million for slandering Elma. And that's how he gets first contact, basically. He gets them to show up by serving them with legal papers saying that he's going to that Elma is suing them for $1 million each, including Inspector Kramer.
Yeah, one of the nice things about the Nero Wolfe stories is that it kind of gives you an insight into the way Rex Stout looks at the world. You don't just have a situation where everyone just agrees to show up and discuss everything with Nero Wolfe. Nero Wolfe is often in a situation where the people that he wants to interview to try and figure out what happened don't want to be interviewed. They don't want to be put in any spotlight. They don't want to be involved in any way. And so he often has to come up with a trick like this to
they're
get people.
They're not in a closed room with him.
Yeah.
as often occurs in, say, Agatha Christie mysteries.
Yeah, sometimes he's able to swing it where he can get the police to bring everyone in, and to a point they'll indulge him. Other times he has to pull a fast one and basically make it in other people's interests that they show up for a bit of an interview.
And oftentimes, though not in this particular story, Archie does something really amazing and perceptive. Archie's perception comes into play. Archie decides to take a course of action which, either intentionally or unintentionally leads to a situation where everybody decides that they need to talk to Wolfe.
Yeah, it's always great when that happens. It's an important thing to remember about these stories is that Nero Wolfe is not in and of himself the center of the story. In fact,
right.
If we're going to look at the amount of time someone's on page as screen time, Archie's screen time is much bigger than Nero Wolfe's.
Archie's screen time is practically 100%. He's the POV character, and the stories are typically written in the first person.
Yeah, so Archie actually does have these moments where, as Nero Wolfe puts it, Archie he often tells Archie to act with intelligence guided by experience, and
sometimes the other way around.
Yes, and sometimes the other way around. And Archie will, at times, take on the role of the main character in the story to kind of... Sometimes his decision is the important one. He'll do something, like you said, very, very perceptive, very sagacious even.
Yes.
And he'll be the one that'll convince someone to show up at Wolfe's for an interview that will get them the information they need. Or he'll be the one to have noticed that something was a bit strange that should be investigated. It's not all just, hey, Wolfe, I went and found this, now solve everything. They
Right.
really do work as a great detective duo in this sense. And it's acknowledged throughout the books. I mean, there's books where where Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin go their separate ways on issues, and oftentimes it's, except in one particular case I can think of, oftentimes it's clear that they would have been better off working together. There is, of course, the case of the story where Wolfe disappears, and at one point he comes back and Archie is actually doing really great business, and it makes Wolfe angry.
Yes.
But yeah, so another thing I just wanted to mention was you talked about how he called Nathaniel Parker to try and get everyone together. Nathaniel Parker is the Nero Wolfe lawyer in these stories.
Right.
Wolfe is often calling him up to discuss any legal matters and to set these kind of legal tricks into motion.
Yeah, and generally, if they get caught and put in jail for some reason, Nathaniel Parker is the one that comes and gets them bailed out, basically.
Yeah, and so in this book, it's not just a case of Elma Vassos helping to set up this little trick. After Pete dies, Nero Wolfe is, of course, the first one that's not necessarily convinced that Pete committed suicide, because that's how it goes, right? So the guy was supposedly thrown out the window.
The police believe that Pete Vassos committed suicide.
Yeah,
and
they believe that he threw.
That's the issue.
Yeah, they also believe that he threw the guy out the window. Who was it that got thrown out the window? Ashby. Yeah. So they think that he threw Ashby out the window and that he then committed suicide. And Nero Wolfe's reaction is to get Elma Vassos to stay at his place because he's worried that something might happen to her, and he wants to keep
and that
her...
it'll be framed as another suicide.
Yes, it'll be framed as another suicide. So he wants to keep her there, set up this trick, and try to get information out of these people while also trying to goad someone into some kind of action that will allow him to pin them as the criminal that threw someone out a window initially.
Right. So we get our cast of characters. They all show up at Wolfe's office, and they have some conversation. Nothing really happens too important in that first conversation, except that Wolfe kind of tests out all of their characters and tries to figure out who's who and how they're all related to Pete Vassos. It's here that he learns the information that he needs to eliminate, to single out the clue that he got earlier and turn it into a point, somebody that points at one person. But he doesn't mention that. That only comes a little bit later. it's an efficient story because there's just a couple of little meetings between these characters, and then basically Wolfe hires Saul Panzer, and Saul Panzer gets the piece of physical evidence that solves the case, and that's it.
Yeah, it kind of rolls off pretty quickly towards the end there.
Yeah, these people all come and meet Wolfe. Archie does a little bit of investigative reporting. He makes a map of the premises. They meet one more time, I think, shortly. But basically, Wolfe gets a memorandum from... Wolfe has Elma write out everything that she knows about her father's relationships with all these people. And that, combined with the slip of the tongue, almost, that he made while he was shining their shoes in the first chapter, leads Wolfe to the solution. And I think Wolfe doesn't get paid in this one. Like, he doesn't even arrange to get paid somehow.
He doesn't get paid in this one.
But without
there's just the
spoiling
satisfaction of having helped out the woman whose father said that he was the greatest man in the world.
Right. And do we want to spoil the ending or not? Probably not, huh?
Yeah, let's not spoil the ending to that one.
It's a good story. It's short. It's only about 70 pages. And it's really solid.
And it might be the best one in that book. It's a single book. The book is written with 3 stories in it, so it's called Trio for Blunt Instruments.
Right.
But that particular one, it had a lot of movement of players and a lot of legwork to find the clues. Sometimes these stories, even though they don't tell you who the murderer is, like an episode of Columbo, that's kind of how they play out, is like an episode of Columbo, where someone knows that Wolfe is onto them, and so the very act of Wolfe taking up a case is often enough to get someone to do something that will expose themselves.
Yes.
So what do we got next? Murder is Corny?
Murder is Corny.
And
now this is one story that was made into an episode of that beautiful, beautiful A&E series back from 2000-ish.
With probably the best cast of actors that have ever graced mysteries.
Indeed, indeed. And this one was no different. This one is an extremely fun little story, although Wolfe solves it in, like, the third page.
I don't know if he solved it by the third page. I think that he had suspicions by the third page, but he wouldn't have necessarily known who exactly was responsible. He just knew that something was very much off.
I'm looking for the phrase. It's. Here it is. Who picked that corn? Phooey. The end of the first chapter. That is the sign that Wolfe knows who the answer to the solution of the murder, basically. And it comes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages in approximately.
Yeah, it's actually one of the best lines even in the show when
yes,
he's having a nice back and forth with Inspector Kramer, and he says, "You failed to see my point. Who picked that corn?" And Kramer says, "That's your point. My point is who murdered whatever his name was."
Yes, and the only thing that Wolfe doesn't do at that point is sigh and say, "It's the same point."
Yeah, he refrains from doing so that he can deal with things on his own and not have to bother with Kramer.
Right. So this story revolves around Wolfe as a gourmand. And this is one of the cases where it's actually a pretty easy thing to replicate. But in the summer, Wolfe and Archie and Fritz get 16 ears of corn a week. Summer sweet corn, 16 ears, nearly mature, still in the husk. And the way that they cook it, and this is a fun little set of lines between Wolfe and Kramer. Wolfe asks Kramer if Kramer's wife cooks corn, and he says yes. And Wolfe says, "Does she boil it in water?" And he says, "Do you boil yours in beer?"
Why don't you just go ahead and read the whole line?
Oh, sure, why not?
Let's
see here.
If you have the book in front of you, I'm assuming
I do indeed have the book in front of me, because why wouldn't I? Okay. Do you eat sweet corn? Yes, you're stalling. No. Who cooks it? My wife. I haven't got a Fritz. Does she cook it in water? Sure. Is yours cooked in beer? No. Millions of American women and some men commit that outrage every summer day. They are turning a superb treat into mere provender. Shucked and boiled in water, sweet corn is edible and nutritious, but roasted in the husk, in the hottest possible oven, for 40 minutes, shucked at the table, and buttered and salted, nothing else, it is ambrosia. No chef's ingenuity and imagination have ever created a finer dish. American women should themselves be boiled in water.
Yes. So, just as an aside, I think we should go ahead and inform people. This is very important stuff.
Yes.
It's true. Go cook your corn
Yes.
this way and tell us we're wrong.
I highly recommend it. I tried it myself. I did 45 minutes in the oven at, I think 400 or 450. I didn't go all the way up to 500, which is, as high as my oven goes, or went at the time. But this was a solidly delicious meal. Incredibly simple. The one problem is I would highly recommend that you keep your windows open when you do this because the husks will smoke at that temperature. But
I actually cook them in the grill.
you could cook them in a grill, which if you use the grill as an oven and have it temperature regulated fairly well, that works pretty well. You can do that outside. It's a very good summer treat.
But yes, if you ever find advice in a Nero Wolfe book on cooking, it's probably solid advice.
It often is a little bit hard to reproduce because it's so removed in time and in the kinds of things that you can get at the local at a common grocery store. Again, Wolfe is very gourmet, and so there's a lot of things that you just don't usually find in the average kitchen, and a lot of there's a point where they're looking into what's the spice or herb that they're looking at, watercress, and Wolfe says it must be Iranian, and Fritz is like, there's no way I can get Iranian watercress, and Wolfe says if it isn't Iranian, I won't use it. There's a lot of fun food banter in these stories, and oftentimes it actually contains kernels of good information on things that you can actually do to cook yourself. There actually is a Nero Wolfe cookbook, which is actually kind of fun because it tries to go through all the books and find all the recipes and fill in all the missing parts where they are, because usually there isn't an actual recipe in the book. It's just a few things are referenced. It's a fun book.
And it's another fun thing about all these books is that even the things that don't necessarily have to do with the murder in question, just the high regard that is held for food and gourmet cooking in these books is great. There's a part of this story where they're talking about how Kenneth Faber was found dead, and the station wagon with the corn is there by Rusterman's restaurant, which Nero Wolfe is a top shareholder in.
A trustee.
Yes, a trustee, thank you. And they ask if they're serving the corn that arrived today, and Kramer says, yes, they've admitted they took it from the station wagon even before they reported the body, which,
right.
which is just like, Kenneth Faber's out here dead. Get the corn, we'll call the cops.
Grab the corn and start cooking it. We don't have time to waste.
Yeah, it's very entertaining how all the food and orchid things play out in these stories.
One of my favorite scenes in the show is actually part of one of the books where Wolfe and Fritz have an argument about a marinade for venison and juniper berries. It's even funnier in the show because Wolfe is kind of childish about it in the show, and he doesn't show that kind of same childishness in the book. But it's just it's a very, very well acted and well shot scene and well scripted scene in the show. But it's in the book too, and it's funny there too.
Yeah, and there's just no end of that kind of interaction. We actually, we talked about this kind of thing. I believe we were talking about, doing good characters at one point, and previously. Like maybe 10 or so episodes ago, something. It can be looked up. Anyway, we had mentioned how you can improve a character with the silliest little thing, like say they have like a button on their bag, and It seems like it's not an important part of the story or anything, but this single button kind of helps develop the character to give you a hint as to what their personality type is like. It was we were talking about show don't tell.
Yeah.
Like perhaps it's I think the example we used was it was like a picture of a bunny on this button or something. And
okay.
It implies the character either likes rabbits or perhaps cute things, and this can be worked into regular things, regular decisions that the character will make based on this one little aspect that is presented in this visual form of a button. And this, nowhere have I seen this so strongly done as with Nero Wolfe and his cooking and orchids.
Yeah.
Sometimes the mysteries themselves are prevented from being solved immediately because of Wolfe's stubbornness about orchids and cooking.
Right. Or his stubbornness about any topic, really.
Yeah.
So in this story, a young man was killed. He was killed outside of Rusterman's restaurant, and the question is, of course, who killed him? But the reason that Wolfe gets pulled into this one is because a woman, the farmer's daughter, who has entered into the modeling business in New York City, she tells a story that basically incriminates Archie. And they basically believe that it is highly likely, the police believe that it is highly likely that Archie killed this man because he's one of the people that had, means, motive, opportunity. So, Archie is basically pulled into this because he needs to get out from under this potential murder charge, and that is what pulls Wolfe in, basically. Archie calls, Susan McLeod in, and he has a talk with her. Wolfe eavesdrops on that conversation, in which she basically admits to lying to the police, and now it's up to them to keep Archie out of jail and possibly solve the murder. Because there's an interesting aspect of Archie here, is that Wolfe doesn't really care about women in the books. He is, if not outright hostile to them, neutral at best. But Archie is a nice kind of chivalrous, sociable guy, and he often is, socially involved with the women that show up in the stories. And one of the things that they hear from the people that they're talking to is that Susan McLeod called Archie a hero. And this gives Archie a very strong reason to be heroic. That is, to avoid simply throwing her under the bus and calling it done. Archie refuses to do that, and that therefore pulls Wolfe in to refusing to simply do that as well. Because they could. In fact, near the end of the story, they do. They send the record of that conversation to Kramer, because Kramer is about to take Archie on murder charges, and they give that conversation to Kramer basically to forestall him. But at that point, it becomes necessary for them to solve the murder in order for Archie and Wolfe not to have an issue that they can't resolve. There's a great point where Archie says, "Can you say that?" He says something along the lines of, "Can you say that we will be obligated to ensure that she doesn't get convicted?" And Wolfe says, because Wolfe at that point isn't necessarily sure that she isn't the murderer herself, because the clue that she gives points either to her or to one other person in Wolfe's mind. And therefore, he says, "I wouldn't say that we would be obligated to do anything whatsoever." And Archie says, "Fine, will we be concerned that she doesn't get convicted?" And Wolfe is like, "Fine, I'll be concerned. Let's just get moving."
Yes, the semantics in a Nero Wolfe book are always exceptional as well. This whole Susan McLeod thing, though, this is the focal point of the story. Susan McLeod is involved with several men in the story, not in a sense of necessarily being some kind of floozy, but more in the sense that Kenneth Faber was someone who was interested in her and wanted to marry her. And he had this list in his pocket when he was murdered, and it had 3 names checked off, 3 of which are 3 other people, and then 1 which was not checked off, and that was Archie Goodwin. This is what initially gets the cops on Goodwin's case, between that and a testimony that Susan McLeod gives. Now, in Susan McLeod's testimony, initially she implicates Archie Goodwin by saying that she had told him to meet her by the restaurant, and they were going to have a word with Kenneth Faber. And this, of course, happens, and then there's a murder, and so it's like, oh, well, Archie Goodwin is clearly involved somehow. But that was a lie that Archie wasn't aware had been told. Archie isn't aware why he's being dragged down to the police station by Kramer initially. He comes back home, and Susan McLeod shows up, and so Nero Wolfe, looking at it as not being part of his problem, leaves them to talk, but it's a bit of a ruse. Wolfe is going to eavesdrop on the conversation, as you mentioned. Right. And Archie has a conversation with her about how she lied, and she tells him what she said, and he doesn't believe that she actually meant to frame him, but he tells her, he essentially says, as a frame-up, this is perfect.
Right.
Essentially, unless I tell them what you told me here in this room and implicate you, because now you've told a lie to the police, so it seems suspicious, you would then be their number one suspect. Unless I do that, they're going to think I'm the murderer.
Right.
But like you mentioned, chivalrous Archie Goodwin doesn't just want to abandon her to the wolves. That's a funny turn of phrase for the story. He doesn't want to just abandon her to the police.
Right.
And he kind of obligates himself to not necessarily throw her under the bus, but to take up the case on his own, at which point Nero Wolfe steps in, and Archie, who had been up for 30-some hours at this point and was too tired to have thought of it, but probably would have, if he had been awake, realizes that him talking to Susan McLeod in Wolfe's office at Wolfe's insistence was a trick so that Wolfe could eavesdrop on them. So now Wolfe is going to take on the case because it's going to affect him. Everything Susan McLeod has done has put Archie in a situation where he could be held responsible for a murder, which would take him away from Nero Wolfe, which would affect Nero Wolfe's ability to do business, ergo Wolfe is now involved in the case. That's the way Nero Wolfe looks at it.
Yep.
These three other men in the story are three other guys that were interested in Susan McLeod, and Kenneth Faber knows this when he makes his list, and the point of this list is that he had been going around telling other people that he had gotten Susan McLeod pregnant to get them to kind of back off and to try and force her to marry him, to try and basically put her in a position where everyone thinks that she's going to have his kid, and so it would be in her best interest to marry him.
Right.
Bit of a sleazy thing to do, but that means you have 4 people that are suspects in this murder, and the one name that wasn't marked off being Archie's makes him suspect number 1, even though he didn't know anything about this, and everything that Susan had said that he was involved in, he was, made up. So they eventually have conversations with these 3 men as well, who are a real cast of clowns.
Yep. Three Stooges,
yeah,
I think he refers to them at some point.
Definitely. It's a bit of comic gravedigger fun when they actually show up at Wolfe's office, and even after that, when they go back to one of their apartments and are getting interviewed by Archie. They're trying to determine, who might have really murdered Susan McLeod. This is the point at which, up until then, Nero Wolfe and
just to hold off 1 second,
yes.
there's another aspect of this that I think is very interesting. Is that the second time they show up, or the first time they show up, basically they leave because Wolfe says, if you guys don't help us, we're gonna send the attention to Susan McLeod. And they say, we don't believe you, we're out of here. The second time they show up, and Wolfe says, I won't have them in my house. And Archie's like, why won't you have them in your house? We need information from them. And that's why they end up going to one of the 3 men's apartments.
Yeah, Archie has to go and do the detective
This is something
work.
Wolfe does a lot, is he bars someone entrance to his home, which results in a change of venue, which helps to make the stories pop out a little bit more instead of having everything happening in Wolfe's office. Yes,
and it also kind of fleshes out the whole Nero Wolfe stubbornness angle.
It also is interesting because it in retrospect it turns out that it's a clue that Wolfe has already excluded these 3 from suspicion.
Yeah, there's also that. It's interesting to note, and I feel like we can spoil this one. Do you want to spoil this one, or?
Well, okay, so basically when Susan McLeod is talking to Archie, or talking to Archie and Wolfe says, one of these 3 men, you may not want to believe that any of your friends are murderers, but one of these three men went down there and did that. If it was one of them, which one? And she responds, none of them. And they make the point in a little bit of a roundabout way that she isn't very bright. She's kind of not the smartest tool in the drawer. And from this, Wolfe concludes that it isn't that she's not just like pontificating. She's saying it is none of them, and therefore initially his suspicion is that it's either her or it's her father. So so that one statement narrows it down to two people for Wolfe, and then later on they basically get the evidence, and so they basically get the evidence that it is not her, that it is in fact her father who was the murderer, and the evidence that they get is more corn that shows up, and that corn Wolfe comes down from the plant rooms before 6 o'clock, which is nearly unprecedented, and answers the door himself, which is also nearly unprecedented. And then he grabs the box, and there's a whole very fun series of events of Wolfe calling Kramer, having Kramer call the bomb squad, having the bomb squad come, having the bomb squad take the bomb away, and examine it, and then finally they call in, and that's the solution. Basically, is that Wolfe had sent Saul Panzer with a memo to her father that asked 3 questions that basically implies that Wolfe knows that he's the killer. And upon getting that memo, he, instead of picking corn and sending the corn to Wolfe, he filled a box with dynamite, set it up to trigger when you open the box, and sent that to Wolfe instead. So, yeah, the story ends with Pearlie Stebbins heading to the McLeod farm and discovering, as happens in many Wolfe stories, that the culprit has conveniently committed suicide.
Yes, and in this particular story, spoiling this one isn't too big of a deal because it becomes very obvious. This was the easiest one to solve. I mean, it's implied heavily that while Susan McLeod doesn't suspect the other 3, it seems like she knows who is the murderer, and therefore it would have to be someone she knew and was trying to protect. And if the other 3 were discounted, then it had to have been her father, as early in the story, he even outright says that he would have killed Kenneth Faber if he could have gotten his hands on him.
If he had known about what he was saying.
Yeah,
so the only leap of logic is that Kenneth Faber did in fact tell him.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where they present it like it's a red herring to make you look at him, but it's like, oh, it's so obvious that it's him that it's probably not him, but it actually is. Right. And then with the picking of the corn thing, of course, that's, again, Duncan MacLeod, and not the Highlander.
It's a combination of Duncan MacLeod and Wolfe's ego, because at the very end of the story, Wolfe is like, yeah, this corn that I buy from him, it isn't cheap, because I am very, very particular about how ripe it is. And it must literally be a significant fraction of his yearly income is this one summer, these 3 months of me getting corn from him. So it's a little bit of his ego, too, that he's like, he wouldn't want to lose me as a customer because he had to dynamite some rocks and stumps. Clearly, it was something more important, namely murder.
Yes. And so there's just so many things that end up pointing to him by the end of the story. It's actually, it was one of the simpler ones to see coming.
Yeah. And the real fun in this story is the action. There's the fist fight between Archie Goodwin and the three Stooges, and then there's the action of the whole bomb squad situation, which is really fun to read.
The bomb squad part was great in both the show and the book. It was
yes.
It was weird in the show though, because they actually have the bomb squad there in Nero Wolfe's office looking at the bomb with Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin present. Which is something that a bomb squad wouldn't normally do. They'd be like, no, you got to clear out. We're going to take care of this. The book, they brought it out to a van and examined it there.
And then they left.
Yeah.
Yeah, they took it to their place and worked on it.
Yeah, so it's definitely one of the more satisfying stories, even if it was a little easier to figure out, just because, the tension of the whole bomb thing and the fact that Nero Wolfe had at the last moment considered it a possibility that Duncan MacLeod might set a trap for them, because Nero Wolfe wouldn't have been the one to die in the instance of them opening the box of supposed corn and actual dynamite. It would have been either Fritz or Archie Goodwin. And so Nero Wolfe essentially plays a superhero role in this moment. In using his genius for something other than solving a mystery, he uses it to prevent the death of people in his home.
Yeah.
And it's really not the first time he's done it either. I mean, he did it in Fer-de-Lance with the snake.
Yep.
He's done it several. There are times where, I forget which story it was, the Disguise for Murder, where he tells Archie that the mission he's got in mind is particularly dangerous to Archie, and so he's leaving the decision of whether they should attempt it up to Archie.
Yeah.
For as much as Nero Wolfe is a very stubborn person, he's concerned about the people that he surrounds himself with.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's Murder Is Corny. So we've got one
Number
more.
3, Blood Will Tell.
Yes.
And this is a story that I really enjoy reading because it's one of the very few stories where Archie figures it out fairly early on as well. With a little bit of Wolfe's help, basically. So this one starts out with a very strange set of occurrences.
Opens with a bit of intrigue.
Yeah. Archie gets a package in the mail. And inside, I was prompting.
Yes. Inside, there's a necktie with a stain on it and a note that says, Archie Goodwin, keep this until you hear from me. And it's initial JNV, which is...
James Neville Vance.
James Neville Vance is... I can't actually remember what he did for a living. He's a very wealthy
musician.
man.
He's a wealthy musician.
Yes, he's a wealthy musician. And Archie Goodwin gets this package, and it's a little bit of a strange thing to get, and he looks at the stain on it, and it's quite possible...
It's a necktie.
Yes, it's quite possible that the stain on the necktie is, blood. And so... I don't know about you, but I thought that the alarm bells that it raised should have been a little bit higher on Archie's part. But I guess it was one of them things where it's like, I don't know what to do with this.
I think Archie is very open-minded in general, and so he doesn't usually make a conclusion like that until he gets pushed toward it. And it happens very quickly. Like he gets the thing, and then he basically, let's see. He makes a couple of phone calls, and then he immediately, in the same first chapter, gets a phone call from someone who claims to be James Neville Vance and says, "Oh, go ahead and burn that." And that's when the alarm bells start to ring.
Yeah, it's clearly, I mean, especially in the line of detective work, someone sends you a stain tie in the mail and says, "Keep this for me," and then you get a phone call that says, "Please burn that." It's like, Is this evidence? This sounds like evidence. I think this is evidence of something.
Right, well, I mean, Wolfe makes that point himself later in the story.
Yeah, but I mean, it's kind of obvious out of the gate. Like, I don't know why anyone wouldn't think
No, I
that
know,
at that
but
point.
like, one of the points that Wolfe makes at the end is, why would he send... If he was going to send this to somebody, you would want to send it to the most lazy, ignorant, stupid, unintelligent person you want. Instead, you sent it to Archie freaking Goodwin. What were you thinking? If I can find the quote, I don't know if I can find the quote quickly, but basically this sets in motion the whole story, which is just kind of fun. It's a very good story. Here it is. It's only that he is my confidential assistant, and I would like to know how you got the strange notion that he would best serve your purpose. He is inquisitive, impetuous, alert, skeptical, pertinacious, and resourceful. The worst choice you could possibly have made. Kind of a beautiful little send-off from Wolfe there.
Yes, when they finally capture the murderer. It's a bit of a tricky one, because you have this kind of, like, 3 cups problem. Which one is the pea hiding under? And
right.
You've got Archie Goodwin going to one guy saying that, well, yes, that's one of my ties, but I don't know how you got it, and I didn't send that, but it's like, well, it's your stationery and it's your tie. Someone that you know must be involved in this. And so
it's some kind of a prank, yeah.
Yes, it becomes this big looping interview process of trying to track down everyone who might have been involved. And of course, there's...
So what initially happens is that after getting the instructions to burn it, Archie's like, well, I'm not going to do that. And he just goes to James Neville Vance's house. And he meets with Vance, and then through a series of after a little bit of conversation, a police officer shows up. Is like, "Hey, I need to check out this one apartment," and so they go down and they find a body.
Yes. So they find a body, and it's interesting that they just had this rando police officer with Archie at this point, because
Well, he wasn't with Archie. He just showed up.
yeah, he just showed up.
Basically.
He wasn't like a regular in the stories, though. At least not that I
No.
remember.
They do this a lot, where like basically, Rex Stout needs somebody to find the body, and so what happens is that someone calls the police anonymously and reports a dead body, and then a rank and file police officer comes to check out either a room or a building or a car or something like that. It happens a lot in these stories. Sometimes even Wolfe himself is the person who instigates it, and has Fritz disguise his voice and call the police and be like, "Hey, there's a body in this room of this hotel or whatever."
Ever with the tricks.
So this one is one of the more salacious stories. Usually Wolfe tries to avoid working with cases that involve, romance and sex. But this one, it's kind of inextricably connected, because the murder victim is the wife of a man, and she's described in a very weird way, as if she's just like almost mindlessly promiscuous, and that's kind of the, unfortunately for Wolfe, that's kind of the crux of the motivation for the murder here. And so it becomes this very tangled, oh, but this person says this, and this person says this, and this person says this, which means that pretty much nobody's, what would you call it, testimony is accurate. And so the question becomes, for whom can we find a conclusive piece of physical evidence that links them up?
Yeah, and I actually, I'm trying to remember how they, like what was the deal with Jimmy Vance? I'm probably gonna have to flip.
Okay,
through
so the way that this story works, and we really can't go any further without spoiling the ending.
Yeah.
But the answer is given about halfway through the story, because basically, Wolfe says, "Oh well, I have the answer. I know who it is." And Archie's like, "Well, I'm not quite there yet." And Wolfe's like, "Well, what do you got?" Archie's like, "I have 2 points," and Wolfe says, "There are 4." And so they outline these 4 points in about the middle point of the story, and the conclusion that they both come to is that it is James Neville Vance himself who is the murderer. So what they basically do is they contrive a way to search Vance's apartment up on the 4th floor of his house, and it's kind of clever. They basically make a deal with Kramer to have Kramer bring Vance in, on the tomorrow morning for up to 6 hours, starting at like 10 a.m. And they arrange for one of the other characters, not the wife of the suspect, like not the wife of the person that the police suspect, but the wife of the other guy who was philandering with the police's suspect's wife, who is the victim. It's kind of a weird little triangle thing going on here. But basically, she agrees to go up to Vance's apartment and talk with him, and when Vance gets pulled out by the police, she stays there. She lets in Archie, Saul, and Ori, and Fred, and they go to town. They find the evidence. They find more evidence than they expected to find, and that's what allows them to solve the case, which comes to a very nice little climactic action-y scene at the very end where Vance realizes he's cornered and freaks out.
Yeah, and what I love about the ending to that one is that this also happens in a lot of Nero Wolfe stories, where legally speaking there are things they can and cannot do. And so when Wolfe and Kramer work out this deal where Kramer's going to apprehend and hold Vance for 6 hours.
6 hours, yeah.
Inspector Kramer tells Wolfe, "Now, I don't expect that you're going to do anything illegal here. No breaking and entering or anything like that," which is why they had set it up so that what's her name would still be in the apartment for to unlock the door for Archie and everyone. So technically they didn't break in, so they're good. And they always managed to kind of work around Kramer's authority in this manner, because if they had told him the whole plan, he wouldn't have gone along with it.
Right.
But they got him to agree to it, and Nero Wolfe said, we won't do anything illegal. And so he had Nero Wolfe's word. He didn't break his word. Everything's Jake, as Archie might say.
And then Wolfe would say, there's good slang and there's bad slang. That's bad slang. There's a fun little bit that I love when Saul Panzer finds the evidence. Archie notes that Saul pins a memo to it on which he writes, I found this blah 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 at this time in this place, signed Saul Panzer. And I just find it funny. There's a neat little, just a little half sentence where Archie's like, oh, and I noticed that he signed it with a very with a big curly Q under the Z, and just another little. He does that a lot. That is to say, Rex Stout does that a lot, where he very gradually drops in little character details about each character that gives them a little bit more depth every book that you read. And so every time you read a new Nero Wolfe book, you're learning a tiny little bit more about all the characters that are recurring. And it just makes it a pleasure to read a new Nero Wolfe book because you know you're going to get something new about someone that you love to read about.
Yeah, just start picking up Nero Wolfe books and reading them, and you'll really get into the characters if you love a good mystery. You'll want to know more about Fritz and Saul Panzer and all the characters that only appear semi-regularly and only in a few paragraphs at a time.
Yeah, and it saves a lot of space in each book because Wolfe just kind of gives one or two little points for each character, as well as the very vital bits for each of the detective kind of thing, each of the detective characters. Saul's really good at everything. Fred is really good at tailing, but not super intelligent. Ori's really charming. He gives, aside from those very important basic information about their skill set, he gives each of them a little character quirk in every story that makes them a little bit more well-rounded every time you read one of them. And so, yeah, this is why you read multiple Wolfe stories, because every Wolfe story that you read makes all the other ones better. Because when you go back and read a story that you read a while ago, you now have all these extra little character bits in your head that make the character seem so much more colorful in that book than they were the first time that you read it.
And after reading about 10 Nero Wolfe books, you'll have gotten enough of an idea of these characters that they'll probably feel more fleshed out than all of the characters in Lord of the Rings by the end of the third book.
I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily go that far, but they have lots of neat little quirks and idiosyncrasies, and they really feel fully painted in by the time you've read. I'd say 10 books is about right.
It's a bit of an exaggeration. I just want to get the point home that Rex Stout does a wonderful job.
It's incredible character building. It's just done in a very distributed way.
Yeah, but the fact of what the Nero Wolfe books are, it doesn't matter that you have side characters that are only being built bit by bit, because they're meant to just be picked up and read as a self-contained thing. And so when you read several of them, it's just more satisfying when you've gone through a dozen books and then you read the next book and Nero Wolfe says, "Call Saul Panzer," and you're already ready for it. You're like, "Oh, I love it when Saul Panzer shows up. He's always got some trick up his sleeve."
Yes.
It's a very fun way to write characters, I think.
It of course does require you to write a huge long series with them, but I mean, Rex Stout was up to the task.
Yeah, that was what are there, like 72 or so Nero Wolfe novels?
No, not that many. I mean, if you count each book as a book, there's like 45 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a big number. He basically wrote approximately one book a year between 1934 and 1975.
Completely unrelated, but just since it popped into my head, it's interesting to note that David Suchet, who played Hercule Poirot in the Hercule Poirot mysteries, he actually covered every single Hercule Poirot novel.
Really?
Yes, he did an episode for every single story.
Very nice.
And unfortunately, he died shortly after the last one, but it's
his work was finished.
Yeah, it's just wonderful to think of that, because I remember a while back I was watching some of the mysteries, and I was like, wait, this is new. They're still making more of these? And I think I had started watching Hercule Poirot back in, what was it, the late 80s that it started?
Okay.
I mean, it was a long time ago. It's just like, this is still running. He did every single story. He is, for all intents and purposes, Hercule Poirot.
That's awesome.
And he also played the villain in Terry Pratchett's Going Postal. So yeah, just a little non-Nero Wolfe trivia. But I mean, if Maury Chaykin is the be-all end-all of Nero Wolfes, David Suchet is definitely the Hercule Poirot.
Yes.
And I'm just going to throw this out here because I'm right and everyone else is wrong. Jeremy Brett is Sherlock Holmes.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So there's me being stubborn like Nero Wolfe, who would rip out pages of a dictionary if he didn't agree with the wording. What was it? I mean, contact was listed as a verb in one of the books that he had a dictionary in one of the books and he was tearing out pages.
There was something about something being listed as an adjective or something like that, and he didn't like that either.
Yeah, he was just tearing pages out of a dictionary and throwing them into a fire.
Right.
He is seriously the best detective novel character of all time.
Indeed.
Objective fact.
Objective fact. Solved.
My largely biased objective fact.
Right.
All right, so that is Trio for
That'll do it, I think.
Blunt Instruments.
Yeah, this is the Trio for Blunt Instruments. There are a bunch of these Nero Wolfe books that have 3 and sometimes 4 novellas in them, and they're always a treat too. Even though they're shorter, he does a really good job of compressing a mystery into 70 pages and making it fun and engaging and different. And, I reread these on a regular basis, and it's just a lot of fun.
If you want
they are great books.
If you want some really good short ones, I believe the book that has 4 of them is called 4 for Murder.
And 4 to go.
Yeah. So those ones are nice and short.
There might be more than one.
A good introduction, if you will.
Yeah. Those ones are really short, though.
Okay. So it's a good sitting on your porch read.
Yep. Exactly. All right. Well, I think that does it for this episode. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you will pick up an enjoyment and love for Nero Wolfe from these conversations as we have.
And harass people on the streets with your knowledge of Nero Wolfe and why it's so great.
Yes. And yell at people when they use contact as a verb.
Shout from the windows. Become that mad soothsayer on the street, but for Nero Wolfe.
And be rich if you can, because then you're more like Nero Wolfe.
Yeah, that helps.
Yes, it definitely helps. All right, Wordy Pair episode question number. But as always, I'm Rudy.
And I'm Justin.
And we will see you all next time.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.